Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and you're watching The Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today, another list video. This time we're going to be taking a look at 10 great underrated comic books for new readers. And I can't wait to get started. But before we do, I just want to mention our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking for comic book collected editions, I always encourage you to check out their website. You can use my code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout to receive $2 off of your order. Please note if you make any purchases with my affiliate codes or links, I will get a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support our channel. Thank you for considering. Now on with the show. First up on my underrated comics list, Geiger by Geoff Johns and Gary Frank from Image Comics. This little collection was one that snuck up on me last year. I didn't know much about it before I just went ahead and bought the trade paperback. I, like many others, am a huge fan of Geoff Johns' work over at DC Comics, but I'll admit I haven't really read anything from him that didn't come from DC. So when I heard he was paired up with his longtime collaborator, Gary Frank, on a more indie-feeling series over at Image, I knew I was interested right off the bat. What Geiger is basically about is it's a dystopian future America where everything's kind of like an irradiated wasteland. And in the midst of this, we have sort of a, radioactive kind of superhero, vigilante, kind of wanderer known as Geiger, the radioactive man. It's really a heartfelt, character-driven story through this dystopian wasteland, but I found it to be really moving, a little bit sinister, and absolutely gorgeous to look at. The art from Gary Frank is just some of my favorite I've ever seen him produce, and he has done some masterful works in the past. I always try to recommend Batman Earth 1 if you haven't checked out that series, but at any rate, this is some of the best work I've ever seen from Frank. I don't know if it's because of the incredible kind of fantasy world building we have in this dystopian future, but I really feel like he was able to just kind of let his hair down, let loose. We have some gorgeous just vistas of this wasteland world. We have some grotesque, almost monstrous kind of people. Really just a fascinating series. It's also part of a kind of shared universe for Johns over at Image called The Unnamed. I believe the only other work we have in that right now is Junkyard Joe, another really fun title from Image and by Geoff Johns here. Anyway, great book. I think a lot of people should be reading this that probably aren't, so I had to include it on my underrated comic list for new readers. Next up, we have the Wolverine by Greg Rucka Ultimate Collection over at Marvel Comics. I do believe that this printing is currently out of print, but you should be able to find it on secondary markets, or I'm sure you can find the single issues, digitals, things like that. Why I threw this on the list is because I am definitely a big Wolverine fan, and I feel like Rucka's run on the title, for whatever reason, just does not get talked about enough. This was one of the first Wolverine runs I had ever read front to back, and I really loved it. To this day, one of the most haunting but beautiful Wolverine comics I've ever read is actually the first issue in this run. I have never been more glued to a series from a first issue than I think that this first issue of Rucka's Wolverine run. It ultimately tells the story of this girl who kind of works at a local diner, who might be in trouble, who has this kind of feral-looking neighbor, which we know to be Wolverine. It's sort of her diary entries, and she kind of goes through the story of how she notices this neighbor and how she's just kind of in trouble. Without going into too much greater detail, I think that this single issue really shows us so much about the heart and nature of the character of Wolverine, and it was a really memorable way to start a series run. I think that this is fantastic for new readers as well. You're kind of just traveling across the country with Wolverine as he goes from kind of mystery and crime fighting situation to the next. Feels much more street level and real. We don't really have a lot of the tights and costumes and super heroics, and I think I really liked that for this Wolverine story. He's just kind of this wanderer who's trying to right wrongs, sometimes violently. Really, really a good run. I know Rucka is such an amazing comic book writer, and I just think that more people ought to read his run here on Wolverine. I think it's totally accessible for brand new readers, and it made me care about this character in a whole new way. Definitely recommend it, and I think it's an underrated gem over at Marvel Comics. And while I have you, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I highly encourage you to do so. I'm always doing videos like this, comic book reviews, unboxings, and the like. Would love to have you aboard. Thank you for considering. Now let's keep going. Next on our list, Nocterra by Scott Snyder and Tony S. Daniel. This is another Image comic book series that I think is definitely underrated. Another dystopian future series, this time in a world that's completely gone dark. And within that darkness, mutated monstrous versions of old life on Earth. This is definitely a dystopian, dark fantasy science fiction series, and it's a whole lot of fun. There's a lot of action, some gorgeous art, and it's just a really fun world. I think the world building in Nocterra is really tremendous. I don't know if I'm just really starting to enjoy this kind of dystopian subgenre within comic books lately. You'll find that many on this list kind of have this vibe, but Nocterra really is something special. I've loved Scott Snyder ever since I first read his run on Batman, particularly The Court of Owls, and I've been following his career ever since, and there have been some ups and downs for me, but Nocterra is really a standout. The characters are so likable, and you feel immediately engaged in their plight as they try to bring restoration to this dark, doomed world. I love the kind of factions we have within this series as well. We basically have these people that roam through the darkness with basically big rig trucks that are kind of outfitted with a ton of light, meant to scatter the darkness and discourage some of these dark monsters. Really just a fascinating book. I love kind of trying to delve into the origins of why this happened to the planet and what can or cannot be done to help save it. The characters, like I said, are really likable. I think that they're very memorable. I like the entire setup of this world. I think it's very imaginative. I think it really does play on some kind of archetypal tropes that are familiar to me, and yet I see them in a brand new way, and to have it in a comic book medium like this is just a series to watch out for. It's still an ongoing title, so it's being discussed today, and I think it's a perfect place to start for new readers trying to read an underrated comic book gem. Next on our list, Nightwing by Kyle Higgins from DC Comics' New 52 era. And this is an unusual one to have on my list, I'm sure, for many people, but I really can justify this one. I think for me, there's been so much popularity with Nightwing recently, particularly due to Tom Taylor's run on the book, which is absolutely phenomenal. I've reviewed a few of the collections already. Highly agree that that's a great book. But another run on Nightwing that I think deserves a little bit more credit is this one here from Kyle Higgins. You might recognize that name as well from the incredibly popular Radiant Black series, another fantastic title I'd recommend, but because Nightwing is so buzzworthy these days, as is Radiant Black, which was also written by Kyle Higgins, I thought that this would be a good title to throw in my recommendations list today. This is, again, part of DC's New 52 era, which was kind of a soft relaunch, reboot for a lot of their classic titles. Because of that, it's a fantastic place to start reading any given DC book, at least for my money. So I think this is perfect for new readers who want to read a Nightwing story. Maybe they've read some of the stuff from Tom Taylor or Chuck Dixon in the past, and they're looking to read more from the character. I definitely think this run deserves more discussion and certainly readership. It's definitely a memorable one, at least for me. The art throughout is absolutely gorgeous, and I just think that there's a lot of fun pockets of storytelling here. We get to delve into kind of the history of Dick Grayson, some areas that hadn't been addressed before, characters that we've never seen that presumably interacted with him throughout his youth. I really think that this was a fun touch that didn't feel shoehorned in, but was treated with a lot of respect, and I really liked that. I love the character of Dick Grayson, and I think just seeing this chapter of his life and unearthing things about his own past and his identity in the present was really just something that should be read. Would definitely recommend this for a new reader interested in Nightwing who maybe doesn't want to just focus on the Tom Taylor stuff that everyone's talking about today, which again is worthwhile as well, but I thought I'd throw in an underrated gem. Next on our list is Undiscovered Country by Scott Snyder and Charles Soule. Yes, this is another dystopian future series, also by Scott Snyder, but it deserves a place on my underrated comics list for new readers, simply because I really like this series. In fact, I like it so much that I keep doing videos that showcase it, even though they don't perform overwhelmingly great on my channel, just because I think more people should give this series a chance. I know it's still on ongoing, so there has to be people reading this as well, but I just never hear people talking about this or discussing it, and I think that's a real shame. This whole series takes place in, again, a near future where the US has been locked off, walled away, and completely outside of communication with the rest of the world for several years. The rest of the world in that time has basically devolved into two primary factions, and they also live in a world that's completely devastated by this global pandemic or plague. In the midst of all of this chaos, the message is finally received from the US inviting a random eclectic group of people to come into the US to tour around and possibly find a cure for the disease that's ravaged the rest of the world. In comes our ensemble cast of characters who don't really know much about America or what's going on there, and we find as readers that the America we once knew is gone, and in its place is a weird, wacky world that has kind of a segmented design where America's broken off into a couple different distinct regions, all focusing on a different area or aspect of national identity gone wrong. It's a really fascinating book. It's kind of a journey fantasy narrative, and I think that there's something to it that makes it just feel so unique. The art is really captivating throughout, and I think the story's kind of central mystery is really what's pulling me along this incredible journey. At any rate, this is a series I'm currently reading, and I hope that many more give it a chance. Next on my underrated comics list, Batman, Their Dark Designs by James Tynion IV. This is from DC Comics, and it's the beginning of Tynion's run on Batman. I think because of that, it's a perfect place to start for new readers, and I think in the sea of amazing Batman comics, this one might be getting a little overlooked. This storyline follows the Tom King era Batman, and for my money, it's my favorite part of James Tynion's Batman run completely. I did love the work he did on Detective Comics, but as far as his Batman stuff goes, there were a lot of fun reads, but I don't think anything ever topped this first story arc, Their Dark Designs. It's a really interesting Batman crime story that does a lot of flashback work with some of Batman's rogues gallery, and this kind of elusive figure called the Designer who presumably plots the most insidious crime or perfect crime ever, and we have just some really interesting interplay between the present with Batman and Catwoman and the past where we know that the Riddler, Penguin, Catwoman, and the Joker all plotted with this mysterious Designer. I think for those that are interested in more kind of an intriguing Batman mystery with some gorgeous artwork, this is definitely a comic for you. Again, I think that people really focused on things like Joker War or Fear State when they talk about the Tynion era, but I really think that Their Dark Designs is the high point of his run on Batman. I also really just don't think you need to know a ton about Batman to enjoy this book. I think it's pretty accessible to new readers, and I think the art is just really gorgeous. I had to include a Batman book on this list, and there are so many underrated Batman comics out there. In fact, if you have some, please let me know in the comments. I'm always interested in finding more Batman gems, as I'm such a huge fan myself. But for today's purposes, I had to recommend Batman, Their Dark Designs. I really love this book, and in fact, looking at this now, I think it's about time I give this book a reread. Next on our list today, Star Wars by Jason Aaron. This Omnibus edition was a collection from Marvel Comics I reviewed on the channel a few months ago, and I have to admit it's really left a lasting impression on me. Granted, I've been a huge fan of the Star Wars film franchise for most of my life, like so many others, but I haven't really delved deep into the world of Star Wars comics, and I've been a little bit trepidatious to do so. That being said, I'm so happy I gave this run a chance. It was absolutely spellbinding and wonderful to behold. I think within this book, we have just an incredible attention to detail. Every story just about within its pages is set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, but as long as you've watched some of those original movies, you can absolutely enjoy this comic book. It's extremely accessible and just a whole lot of fun. The characters absolutely resemble, both physically and written-wise, the on-screen counterparts of those same characters, and the whole adventure aspect of it really has the same tone and fun we see in the movies. And I think that that's one of the best compliments I can give a book like this. I was absolutely floored to enjoy the just sheer amazing science fiction, fantasy, space opera we would have within this omnibus collection. I know there are other formats to get this book, but if you're a fan of Star Wars and are just getting into the world of comics, I think that this Jason Aaron Star Wars run is the perfect place to start for new readers. And I know that this run is generally really well regarded in the world of Star Wars comics, but why I included it on this underrated video is because I think it needs to be enjoyed by a broader audience of comic book fans. I don't think it should just be Star Wars superfans that pick up a title like this. I think if you've seen the movies and you just enjoy comic books, this book should be checked out. It's a really fun science fiction story. It was much more enjoyable than I even hoped it would be, and Jason Aaron is just a rare talent. I think this book showed me just how diverse his actual style can be, and like I said, it feels so true to that original Star Wars trilogy. Highly recommend. Next up on our list, Howard the Duck by Chip Zdarsky and Joe Quinones, the Omnibus. This is a really small omnibus collection, but it packs one heck of a punch. I knew almost nothing about Howard the Duck before picking up this collection, but it ended up being one of my favorite books I read last year. I've become a huge Chip Zdarsky fan between his run on Daredevil and this book right here. I also really enjoyed his Fantastic Four, Little Fate of the Four, Marvel 2-in-1 run that I had a chance to read. This guy is just an absolute rare talent, and I think what we have here in Howard the Duck is really impressive. I think if you've only read Chip Zdarsky from his Daredevil run, you'll be surprised at the sheer range this artist can produce. This book is so fun. Tonally, it's very lighthearted and jovial, but there is a surprising amount of dramatic heart and punch in this book that really just leave an impression. I was so moved by this book. I was floored by this book, and this book made me laugh. I think it made me tear up a little bit, frankly. It just really is just a fantastic read, and it goes by pretty zippily. We have his entire Howard the Duck run in here. There's some great just appearances from characters like Squirrel Girl and Gwenpool, which are also other kind of funny, lighter-hearted, kind of Marvel buzzy characters recently. And I think that this is just a really fun read for new readers who are maybe looking to start with Marvel Comics, but don't want to read the just kind of standard superhero books they can find on the shelves. This book, like I said, is really comedic, but has a lot of heart. The art style from Quinones is absolutely gripping, as you can see in the pages here. It feels much more cartoony, zany, animated, which definitely matched the tone of this book as well. And even after reading this some months ago, I often think about this book. I think it's definitely underrated, and in a world where Zdarsky has become so popular, and for good reason, I think too many people are sleeping on this incredible title. Definitely check out Howard the Duck, and let me know if you already have in the comments. Next on our underrated comic book list, Fantastic Four by Matt Fraction, Mike Allred, and Mark Bagley, Omnibus, over at Marvel Comics. For longtime watchers of my channel, this book might not be too surprising to have on this list, as this was one that I feel is so underrated. I've talked about it in a handful of videos. I think that this whole run by Matt Fraction is unfairly maligned simply because it followed directly after Jonathan Hickman's run on Fantastic Four, which is celebrated as one of the best Fantastic Four comic runs of all time. And I don't know if it's because of that this book is generally not thought of very favorably, this run in general, but I had an absolute blast. I think if you can enjoy this from its own merits and try to take out the fact that this came right after Jonathan Hickman's era on the book, I think that this is such a lovely title, and you can really enjoy it as a brand new reader. This book really splits between Fantastic Four and FF, which stands for Future Foundation. These are kind of twin comic books that were ongoing at the same time, both written by Matt Fraction, but with alternating artists between Mark Bagley on Fantastic Four and Mike Allred on FF. These styles could not be more different artistically, and so you go back and forth throughout this collection, but it really helps punctuate the reading experience, as one book follows the main Fantastic Four and and their kids, and the other book just follows kind of the Future Foundation, which is kind of this think tank of child leaders, and the kind of Fantastic Four stand-in team that kind of takes over while the main Fantastic Four are off traveling the kind of multiverse, traveling through time, basically trying to find a cure for something that may or may not be killing the entire team. It's a really fantastic read that has a great central premise. I thought it was paced very well. It really juggled episodic storytelling and overall story arc storytelling just really well. It's really a memorable run that I had a ton of fun with, and I think is just super underrated. Whether you're a longtime Fantastic Four fan or a brand new reader, I highly recommend Matt Fraction's run. And last but certainly not least for our underrated comic book list today, the all-new Wolverine Omnibus by Tom Taylor. This is a much celebrated comic book creator, and I think that this run does not get enough credit for what it is. I know that I've really enjoyed what I've read from Tom Taylor, whether that be Nightwing, as I mentioned earlier in this video, or things like Deceased, but really one of my all-time favorite books I've read by him is actually this title here, The All-New Wolverine. So this book follows Laura Kinney, X-23, who is now the all-new Wolverine. Having assumed the mantle from the fallen Logan, this book is just such a fun read. I don't even know how to describe it. We have a ton of great standalone adventures and some great overarching kind of mythos and storytelling. The characters are so grounded. I think that that is really the strength of this entire title. X-23, along with a couple of her colleagues in this book, really just sell me on the whole story. It's one of those books that's so character driven that at a certain point, I didn't care what kind of exploits X-23 or Laura Kinney got up to. Just because she was a great character and her supporting cast were great characters, they could do just about anything and I was going to enjoy it. But that being said, we had a ton of really creative and thoughtful adventures from this team, and I just love this book from beginning to end. I sped through this thing. It was so hard to put down. We have just an amazing scope as far as what they cover across this omnibus, and you can get it all in this single omnibus edition, or they have smaller, obviously like hardcover trade paperback kind of collections, I believe. This is a great place to start for new readers, particularly if you want to know more about X-23, Laura Kinney. Of course, you can read some of her earlier appearances, but I think that this is a great place to jump in for new readers. A really great book. I think that it's absolutely underrated. I loved just some of the storylines we got. And even though the art changed hands a few times across the omnibus, everything was just really stunning, totally immersive, and absolutely memorable read. And that's our look at 10 great underrated comics for new readers. I know this list just scratched the surface of all of the underrated comic book gems that are out there. I highly encourage you, if you are a longer time comic book fan or you have comics that you don't think get enough credit or ought to be read by more people, please let me know in the comments below. Let's make this a resource for everyone who wants to get great comic book recommendations that are maybe a little bit off the beaten path, or maybe the books that aren't trending this very second on social media. I would love to have just a great reservoir of comic book recommendations below for new readers and returning readers alike. Let's hear them in the comments below. These are just 10 of mine that came to mind. Let me know what you thought about this concept, if I should make a follow-up video with more underrated gems that I think should be read. At any rate, thank you so much for watching, everyone. This has been so much fun. I've loved making these list videos for all of you. Again, let me know what you think in the comments. Definitely appreciate feedback. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Thank you so much for sticking around. Don't forget to give this video a like and maybe check out some of my others. Have a good one.